So the postal applications for the special one-off 100,000 yen coronavirus payment are by now well underway. We made a video a few weeks ago offering guidance on how to fill in one of these application forms. Soon after making that video, Japan's Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, the people responsible for organising these applications, released an alternative version of the application form, one which enabled optical character recognition, or OCR. And it seems that they were going to leave it up to the local authorities to decide which of these forms they wanted to use. On top of that, local authorities seem to have tinkered with the format of the forms themselves to come up with their own version, something which makes offering guidance on how to fill these things in a little bit tricky, but we're going to give it a go anyway. So in this video, we're going to take a look at how to fill in the OCR version of the application form, and then after that, we're going to go over some of the common mistakes that have been made in these applications, and also address some of your questions about how to fill these forms in. So let's get into it. So this is an example copy of the OCR version of the 100,000 yen coronavirus application form. We downloaded this from the website of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications. Now, when these forms were first issued, there wasn't any English language guidance that you can see here. Obviously, since then, they've added the English language, and that's made it pretty self-explanatory about how to fill these things in. So let's just take a quick look through it anyway. We've got here pre-printed already the name of the municipality to which we are applying. The date of the application isn't pre-printed. You need to fill that in yourself, the year, the month, and the date. And then we can just scroll down. Check your address. This will be pre-printed. Check that it's correct. Below your address is going to be your name. Now, as is typical with Japanese application forms, official application forms, the name is usually presented in two formats. One is using this furigana katakana notation that will be pre-printed. Check it. Below that, you need to write in your own name. When we made our application, we did this in the same way that the name was presented on our certificate of residence, family name and our given names. And we wrote that in pen. I've got my own hanko and I stuck it here. The seal bit is presented in brackets on this application form. So if you don't have your own hanko or your own seal, perhaps this is something that you don't need to be too concerned about. Your date of birth is pre-printed. Once again, check it. Then here you need to enter a contact telephone number. Now, given that you want to be serious about receiving this 100,000 yen, it would seem to be sound advice to enter a phone number which you're actually going to answer at any time of day. So perhaps put in your cell phone number here. Now we come down to this section of the form. This is the section that needs to be filled in if you're wanting somebody else to take receipt of the payment on your behalf. So, for example, you're the applicant, but you don't have a bank account, you need a partner, somebody else to take receipt of your payment. This section needs to be filled in. The person receiving the payment, we need their name in katakana, and as it's normally written in here. We need their address. If they're taking receipt of the payment into their bank account, you need to circle this one here, which means to receive. And then you, as the applicant, again need to write in your name here. If you've got a hanko, stamp it in there as well. Again, this is only if you want a third person, a proxy, to take receipt of your payment. There's another option here. If you want them to apply on your behalf, you need to fill in this section as well. We don't want to get into that in too much detail. We're just looking at the situation that you're the applicant, but you want somebody else to take receipt of the payment. Moving down the form here, this box is asking us, as you can see, to check that we've submitted copies of identification for the applicant. That goes back to your gaijin card. This is the key section down here. This should already be pre-printed with the members of your household who are eligible to receive the 100,000 yen. So just remember, this is 100,000 yen for each person in your household. As the applicant, as the head of the household, your details will be pre-printed at the top of this list. Check them. And then next comes the other members of your household. This is the key box here that people were having trouble with. It's detailed in English for us here. If you want that 100,000 yen, you check the required one. If you don't, you check here. You don't need to touch this part. Moving down the form. Again, it goes into how do you want to receive the payment. Now, when these forms and this application process began, authorities were urging people to make the applications by post or online to avoid people having to go to their municipal office to collect the payment in person and thus perhaps exacerbate the spread of the new coronavirus. So they were really urging us to do this either online or by post. Here we're being asked if we've got a bank account. So we check, don't confuse this box here as a checkbox, it's not, it's part of the kanji for bank. We go over to the next box here, check here if you've got a bank account. Check here if you don't have a bank account, and then go over and read here where it explains if you've got no other choice but to go and collect this in person. But if you've got a bank account or you know someone who's got a bank account and they're taking receipt of the money by proxy, you're going to check here. Now we come to the section where you enter your banking details. This is where this particular version of the form becomes a little bit, in Japanese, mendokusai, a bit of a pain really. It's separated into two halves. So if you take the top half of this box, this is for your Japan Post bank account details. So if you want the money to go into your Japan Post bank account, you need to fill in this top section of this particular box. If you want the money to go into a regular bank account with another banking institution, you're looking at the bottom half of the box. So the top half, Japan Post bank account, enter your name in katakana, enter the passbook code and your passbook number in here. If you're going with a regular bank account, you're looking at the bottom half of this box. You put your name in here in katakana. So it's going to be your surname and your given name. In here is going to be the name of the bank. If you can, you're going to write this as the name of the bank is typically presented. So it's probably going to be kanji, but I reckon you can get away with the Roman alphabet here, to be honest with you. If it's just a regular bank account, you're going to want to circle this ginko kanji here. Then you're going to put in the branch name here, and if it's the actual sort of, if it's a branch, you're going to circle this particular kanji here. If it's like the head office, if you like, circle this kanji here, which says honten. Most of you are likely to have a savings account, this futsu one here, so you're going to check this in here. A current account is if it's like a business account, and then your account number goes in here, and that's your banking details. With the banking details with these application forms, you're going to be asked if whether or not the details that you've entered in the section above are for an account which you are using to pay your municipal tax, insurance, pay water bills, or take receipt of childcare allowance. If that's the same bank account, then you can check yes, you can check the purpose of its use, and then you don't need to submit any copies of your banking details. However, if the bank account that you've entered has got nothing to do with this lot here, then you just want to check no, and you want to submit copies of your bank account details. Let's be honest though, whichever box you're checking, even if you're checking the yes box, it will not hurt to submit copies of your banking details. And then we come to the back side of the form, and this is where we stick our relevant copies. The top box is for the copies of your identification. The second box is for the copies of your bank account details. Now, what can we submit? We can submit, well, it says here in English, a copy of your cash card or a copy of your passbook. When we came to sticking our documents to this particular form, we just used regular glue and kind of roughly stuck it onto the back. And then finally, we've got a checklist here. This is for your own benefit. I don't think there are any penalties for not actually checking these boxes, but you might as well just go ahead and do that. Have you checked the form? Yes. Have you made sure that the banking details that you entered into the form match the banking details on the copies that you attached? Yes. Have you attached all the necessary copies of documents required? Check that there. Fold it up, stick it in that envelope. You don't need a stamp for the envelope, it's free. Go along to your post box, stick it in the slot that says letters, and wait and see what happens. As these applications got underway, TV crews dashed out to municipal offices across Japan to pick up footage of civil service workers checking each form one by one. According to some reports, local authorities were concentrating on those applications that were free of mistakes first, before then going back and double checking and reassessing those applications that appeared to have mistakes. It might be worth noting then that those application forms that have mistakes on them might take longer to process. You might also expect to get a call from your local authority, or indeed to have the application form sent back to you by post. According to some of the early reports that came out soon after the application process or the postal application processes started, these are some of the common errors that applicants were making. Number one, forgetting to enclose copies of banking details. Now, if you're familiar with these forms at all, you'll understand that in order to receive this payment, you need to enter your banking details into the form itself. But you also need to provide a copy of like a bank card or a passbook, which details your account name and account number. You need to provide a copy of that and stick it onto the back of the form as well. It seems that some people were forgetting to do this. Number two, providing a copy of banking details that don't match the banking details entered into the form itself. So, for example, the account number entered into the form doesn't match the account number on the copy of the banking details provided. Number three, entering banking details or providing copies of banking details that are not those that belong to the applicant themselves. So let's imagine, for example, the applicant, the head of the household, is a foreigner. They don't have a bank account. Their Japanese partner, however, does have the bank account. In this case, providing the bank details of the Japanese partner requires you to also fill in that section of the form where you're detailing the person who will receive the payment is acting as a third party or acting as a proxy. You need to fill in that extra section of the form. Perhaps the most common error of all, though, relates to what might seem like a strange question on these application forms asked by the authorities, and that question is essentially whether or not you want to actually receive this 100,000 yen one-off coronavirus payment. So in the early versions of the application form, there was just one box to tick, and it basically was tick this box if you don't want to receive your payment. Now, it seems that perhaps caught up in the feverish anticipation and excitement of getting free money, a lot of people didn't read this correctly and they checked that box, thus indicating that they didn't want to receive the payment. However, according to reports, local authorities kind of used their own common sense. If the applicant had entered in their banking details and provided the relevant copies, but they had checked this box to say that they didn't want the money, authorities largely seem to have taken it upon themselves to assume that actually they just made a mistake and they do want the money. Either that, or they might have called the applicant to check. We can't be sure about this, we don't exactly know. Now, of course, if an applicant had ticked that box to say that they didn't want the money and they hadn't provided the relevant banking details, well then the authorities have no other option but to assume that that person didn't want to receive the money. Later versions of the application form have come out with two boxes, which very roughly translating into English, check this box if you want the money, check this box if you don't want the money. My own local authority sent out a form with those two boxes. They also issued a notice on the form to say that if you didn't check either of the boxes, but you had provided your banking details, then they would assume that you do in fact want the money. But again, if you check the wrong box and you don't provide the banking details, well, it seems like the authorities have no other choice but to assume that you don't in fact want to receive your 100,000 yen special one-off coronavirus payment. So great care should be taken in this regard. In the interest of honesty, up until now, we'd been making these videos without actually having received the postal application forms ourselves. Up until recently, that is, because we got ours the other day and we sent our own application off. So it's been interesting to actually see what's included in these application packages. Now this is going to differ from municipality to municipality, but in our case, we got essentially 5 bits of paper. One was the application form itself, which we've since sent off. The other one was an envelope with 3 postage on it, which you can use to post your application form. We also got this bit of paper offering some basic guidance on how to fill it in, or supplementary details regarding the application. We got this rather daunting looking form warning us about potential scams related to these applications. And we also got a more detailed example of how to fill in the application form itself. This is in Japanese only. On the back, it tells you what supplementary copies you need to be providing with your application. So, since receiving our application package, a couple of things have become clear to us which we want to share with you now. One of our questions was, how can we be certain when the deadline for the submission of these applications actually is, given that municipalities were dealing with them in different time periods? Now, we understood that the period itself was within 3 months. Applications must be submitted within 3 months, but can you give us a specific date, please? In the case of our local authority, it came on this separate bit of paper here in different languages, and it details down here the deadline for the submission of applications. The person standing behind that camera right now, however, didn't get this separate bit of paper. It was detailed in a different way. So again, it seems that these things are going to differ from authority to authority. Up here is a picture of the envelope that came with our application. Now, this is a sort of free postage envelope which you can use to send off your application. There's a date on there. This date is not to be confused with the deadline for the application. The date on that envelope is, well, it seems to be the expiry date for that free postage, which is much later than the 3-month deadline for the 100,000 yen postal application. So don't mix up the two. Another issue that we were curious about prior to making our own application was what kind of identification or copies of identification would be sufficient in this case. Now, when the early forms were issued and the early guidance was issued, it mentioned things like a driver's license, my number card, passport. It didn't even make any mention of the residence card or the gaijin card as we might commonly know it. But we were curious, as a foreigner living in Japan, would a driver's license be sufficient in this case? Now, it turns out in the case of the form from our own local authority, we got this guidance. And at the top here, it targets Japanese people, and it mentions driver's license, my number card, passport, identification with a photo stuck on it, basically. And then the second section is targeting foreigners. And for foreigners resident in Japan, they're asking for your gaijin card or your residence card or your card of permanent residence. So it seems like perhaps submitting a copy of your driver's license or some other documentation might be a little bit risky. We can't be sure, but in the case of our local authority, if you're a foreigner, they're asking for your gaijin card. Staying on the subject of identification or copies of identification that you need to submit with your application forms, just remember that if you change address in regards to your gaijin card, your new address will be printed on the back of that card. So it looks like you're going to need to provide a copy of front and back of that card to submit with your application form. Since we published our earlier video offering guidance on how to complete the 100,000 yen coronavirus payment application forms, postal application forms, we received a number of your comments and questions regarding that application process, which we want to take a look at here. Now, one of these questions was about the boxes that you have to check detailing whether or not you actually want to receive the payment, whether you don't want to receive the payment. And it seems quite naturally that some people can't actually read the kanji above those boxes, perfectly understandable. So we're going to detail some of those kanji here. You can see them somewhere on the screen right about now. Early versions of the application form presented applicants with this option, which you can see on the screen here. It reads, 給付金の受給を希望されない方は and then it's asking you to check the box below. So this means basically, if you don't want your 100,000 yen, you check that box. Alternative versions of the form featured the two kanji options that you can see on the screen now. The first one is yo, which means need, and the second one is fyo, which means don't need. So applicants were being asked to check one of the boxes. Do you need this money? Do you not need this money? Which essentially should be read as, do you want this money or do you not want this money? If you wanted your 100,000 yen coronavirus payment, you would check that box under the kanji which indicates your need. Other versions of the form, in fact the form that we filled in ourselves, featured these two options, 希望する, 不要. 希望する means that you want, you're requesting this money. Again, 不要 means that you don't need it. Regardless whether you need it or not, if you want the money, you want to be checking the 希望する box. Please be warned though, that the way of writing, the kanji used, might vary in each form as issued by the local authority. So unfortunately, none of this really seems to be standardized. There might be variances. As much as possible, we're detailing the kanji as we have seen them so far. There might be others that we've not seen, so please be aware of that. Another question that came up was from people saying that whilst they were the head of the household and thus the applicant for the 100,000 yen payment, they didn't have a bank account, and it was their partner's bank account that they were hoping to use to take receipt of the payment. Should they just fill in their partner's bank account details, and will that be enough? Well, yeah, as far as we understand things, yes, you do fill in the bank account details of the person that you hope or that you would like to be the recipient of the payment. But you also, as the applicant, need to fill in that section of the form that details and declares that you want a third party or a proxy to take receipt of the payment, even if that person is listed as a member of your household and thus a recipient of one of the 100,000 yen payments. If it's not you, the applicant, you need to fill in that proxy or third party recipient section of the form. The position of that section might change depending on what form your local authority is using, but as we understand things, that bit needs to be filled in. Another comment concerned a family of a number of members, and there wasn't enough space to attach copies for each family member's identification or insurance card or gaijin card, whatever it might have been. So it seems like in this case the applicant was mistaken. The identification copy provided is only for the applicant themselves. The rest of the recipients don't need to submit any kind of identification. So you need the copy for the applicant, and that's the head of the household. You need a copy of their identification submitted with the application form. Again, as we understand things. We got a comment from someone saying that they had checked the box that says they don't want to receive the payment of the money mistakenly. They hadn't understood it, they didn't really notice it, or they just kind of checked it offhand. And they were concerned whether or not they were going to receive their 100,000 yen payment. The answer to this is that we don't know. But as to go back again, early reports suggested that if you accidentally checked that box, but you filled in your banking details and provided the relevant copies of your banking details, then local authorities were making the assumption that you'd made a mistake in checking that box and they were issuing the 100,000 yen. Now, we can't speak with any authority on that. That's just the reports. It's obviously up to the people processing these applications, how they understand them. Maybe they're going to contact you, maybe they'll send the forms back. We don't know. But we do know that there were reports of authorities taking it upon themselves to assume that those people who had provided the relevant banking details, even if they had checked that box to say they don't want it, they were assuming that perhaps they'd made a mistake and that they did in fact want the money. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. If you like this video, please click on that thumbs up button below. If you want to see more videos about life as a foreigner in Japan, including interviews, travel videos and how-to guides, please subscribe to the City Cost YouTube channel below, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.